And he's really puzzled by how built up these shoes have become. He feels like they're really wobbly. These were his shoes that he ran the Boston Marathon in. These are very much like the minimal shoes that people are seeing today. So then you could say, well, Irene, don't shoes cushion our landing? How many people think shoes cushion your landings? Okay. So this is the work of one of my colleagues, Jill McGray, looking at landing on stiff mats versus soft mats. And what she found, interestingly, is that when you land on a stiff mat, you soften your landing. And when you land on a hard mat, a soft mat, you stiffen your landing. It makes sense. Think about it. If you were to land on some sand, you're going to stiffen your leg. And if you land on concrete, and you know you're going to land on concrete, you're going to automatically reduce the compliance in that lower extremity. We have an amazing ability to alter our leg spring. This was a study done in 2006 by Bishop, and this was looking at single leg landings, and this y-axis is knee stiffness. He did it barefoot in a $10 shoe, running shoe, which might have come from Walmart, I don't know where you get a $10 shoe, and a $65 cushion shoe, highly cushioned shoe. And what he found is that you have greater knee stiffness in the cushioned shoe. Okay, so again, indicates the softer the surface, the more you stiffen your leg. Now if you land on a stiff leg, guess what? Impact peaks and load rates increase, right? There's been, and this is really what's been very transforming for me, is that there at this point aren't studies that say barefoot or minimal footwear, less injury than shoes. But there's this body of literature that, in my opinion, really builds a case that we need to at least be open-minded about this. And that's sort of kind of where I think that we should be at this point. There have been plenty of other studies in running looking at landing on hard and soft surfaces that also support these results. So you actually land harder when you land on a soft surface. Do another piece of evidence? This is another one. This was a study by Marty in 1989. It's been around for a while. It was actually published in a book, so it has not been peer-reviewed in a journal. But questionnaire given to 5,000 runners in a marathon, asked for demographics, their training mileage, a sense they had a scale for motivation. They asked their injury history and then their footwear, and then they also looked at who got injured and who did not during the race. Now, so what they found, and this is really interesting, and I don't believe that they were looking for this. They found that runners who wore shoes that were $95 or more are twice as likely to get injured compared to those who were in shoes that were $40 or less. Okay, so, you scratch your head and I start, okay, now the scientist in me comes out and I go, oh, no, but what about those people who, maybe the ones that buy the more expensive shoes are the ones that get injured more, so that's sort of biased. Or maybe the ones that buy the $95 shoes are the ones that run more mileage. So maybe that's really what the factor is. But these folks corrected statistically for injury and training mileage. They covariated for it. So I think it's another piece of information. It's really interesting that you run in more cushioned shoes seem to be twice as likely to get injured. My advisor, Peter Kavanaugh, who I just still have the world of respect for, did an amazing presentation on the idea that the foot is a sensate organ. And it is. The foot is a really important sensate organ. There was a study done at the American Society of Biomechanics in 2009. It's not yet been published. But they were looking at differences between the toe socks, these are not Vibrams, barefoot, and socks. And they looked at measures of postural stability. The measure was the time to reaching their boundary conditions of stability, so when they were about to lose their balance. And if you look at this, what they found, more time is better. Okay, more time before you lose your balance. Statistically greater time before they lose their balance barefoot than a very thin pair of socks. We're not talking running shoes, folks. We're talking about a thin pair of socks. Which tells me that that thin pair of socks, it still filters some of that sensory input that you see. So decreased static stability in socks compared to bare feet. Now this is very hot off the press, and basically it's just preliminary data from our lab. We did a really similar study looking at static and dynamic postural stability, barefoot Vibrams, which are the toe shoes, and a pair of Nike Air Pegasus. And we looked at statics like they did, just static stance, and what we found, and now more is worse because we're looking at the area that the center of pressure, the center of gravity went around, so how much area it covered. So the greater area, the more instability. Statistically greater postural instability in static stance. We also looked at single leg landings and found exactly the same thing. This was a different measure, dynamic postural. We actually looked at the integral under the force curves. And the more force, the greater the impulse, the greater the instability. So again, these are preliminary, but they suggest that shoes negatively impact stability. My mom had a total hip operation. I hadn't talked to her about barefoot running or anything. She found that walking barefoot at home, she was much more stable. She doesn't wear shoes. So I think there are lots of sort of support for that. So barefoot actually started to get traction when I was in my PhD at Penn State. There was a study done by Robbins, and this study is actually not that well respected in the literature because it was not a randomized control trial, which is what sort of the standard. However, this particular researcher actually recruited a group of people who said they were going to go barefoot. And they didn't all go barefoot. So the ones that didn't go barefoot served as the controls, and the ones that went barefoot served as his experimental group. He took measures of their arch height, the distance between the heel and the ball of the foot, and some strength measures. And what he found is that those who went barefoot had greater arch height and decreased distance between the heel and the ball of the foot, which indicates that the arch has raised some, and also had increased strength of those muscles. And those who went barefoot longer had greater changes, okay? So he suggested at the end of this paper, this was many years ago, that maybe we need to design shoes that take advantage of the intrinsic functions of the foot, because he felt that shoes were really kind of taking that away. Now, 2001 Stanford University track team goes bare. This is a quote from Vince Landana, who was a very well-respected NCAA cross-country coach. He says, I can't prove this, but I believe that when my runners train barefoot, they run faster with fewer injuries. Okay, this is the Stanford coach, and guess who he's saying this to? He's saying this to the Nike sponsor, who's questioning why his athletes weren't wearing the shoes that they were sponsoring. All right? So I really think they took that back. There's a guy named Jeff Pichata at Nike who really kind of worked on this, this barefoot shoe. And in 2005, you may have remembered the birth of the barefoot shoe. This is the Nike Free, which is like a water shoe, a slipper with a sole. You can bend it, turn it, twist it. And you can see it does have some cushioning. So it's not a true minimal shoe in my opinion, but certainly has taken away the support around the rear foot and the support in the arch. So enter Chris McDougall, who's the author of Born to Run, and at the time was a New York Times journalist. He comes to me and goes, hey, Dr. Davis, what do you think? Now, honestly, I was still going along making my orthotics, remember, from back then, and I really hadn't thought about it, honestly. But when a New York Times reporter comes to you and says, hey, what do you think? You start thinking about it, right? So I remembered the paper from 1987 by Robbins, and just that year at the International Society of Biomechanics, there was a paper that was presented on the Nike Free. And basically what they did is they took 25 individuals and had them simply warm up for 20 minutes in the Nike Free, and then they ran in their regular shoes. The other 25 did their warm-up and their running in their regular standard running shoes. They followed them for 5 months, and they tested agility, strength, shuttle runs, and cross-sectional area of the muscle. This is important because it's very difficult to measure the strength of the intrinsic muscles of the foot. There are 4 layers of them, they're very small. And this is what he found. Most of these were significantly increased in the individuals who went barefoot, so this is the increase in the muscle size. So increased in many of the foot and ankle muscles. This is the shuttle run times, both anterior and posterior, so this is a functional assessment. You can see these are the experimental group, significantly reduced times, whereas the control group, except for this one trend, did not see a change. These are the muscles they were able to muscle test, and again, the group who went with the Nike Free, less support in the arch, greater strength of the muscles, while the other group had no change at all. So again, improved strength of muscles. Now why is that important? Why are those intrinsics so important? Well, if you look at a foot, and we have those 4 layers of muscle, we have 20 muscles in the foot. We're given those for a reason. Basically, they're the first line of defense against the plantar fascia. So we have the muscles holding the arch up, the plantar fascia, which is not contractile. It's basically a tough connective piece of fascia. And when the arch deflects, it gets stretched. So you can imagine that the more it deflects, the less control you have, the more stress you have on it. And so I really think that the reason we have such an epidemic of plantar fasciitis in this country, it's the most common foot ailment. 25% of foot injuries that we see is because we've taught our feet to be lazy. Now, someone has, we don't know at this point what our right and left limits are in terms of who really can tolerate this kind of like minimal footwear or barefoot running. I was presented with a 30-year-old runner with pes planus, so really flat feet, and plantar fasciitis. So this is somebody who presented to me. Now, at the time, I was actually making him a pair of orthotics. This is back early 2005, because I tried everything else. And as a PT, I always did try other things first. Looked at their hips and tried strengthening. Really had very little success. So went to make him a pair of orthotics. Well, while we were waiting for the orthotics, this whole story in the Nike Free came out. So he said, I want to get the Nike Free, Irene. And I said, you're not the person that, who really should be wearing these shoes. You've got flat feet and plantar fasciitis. Well, how do we learn? We learn a lot about medicine by our patients who don't listen to us. And I'm not advocating this. I'm not advocating this. But if you look at for the PTs in the room, if you look at the accelerated ACL programs, it's because those patients didn't listen to us. And that's what he did. He didn't listen to me. He went out, he bought them, and guess what? He was able to run in them, and he was able to do it without. He was able to calm his plantar fasciitis down. I'm not saying they cured it, but he was able to run with these shoes. So what that told me is we still don't know what our right and left limits are in those individuals. Can people with flat feet go barefoot or with minimal shoes? I think so. I've had many, many testimonials since this time. Now, how many people have heard that flip-flops are evil? Evil, evil flip-flops, right? Every year an article comes out in the paper, and I don't know if I have podiatrists in the room, I don't mean to offend anybody, but a lot of times it'll come from podiatrists, and they basically say, these are bad for your feet, right? I'm here to tell you, I think flip-flops are one of the best shoes for your feet, because you've got to really work those intrinsics of the muscles of your foot to keep those flip-flops on, right? But if you wear very heavy, supportive, motion control shoes all through the winter, encase your feet in coffins all winter long, and then most of these people are women who do this. We go out the first spring day, we put our pretty flip-flops on, and we go shopping, right? And we end up with plantar fasciitis. It's like going to the gym and lifting 100 pounds on the first day that you go in. It makes no sense. And I really think it is not the flip-flops, it's your weak feet. So I'm really on a mission to try to change my profession's view about how we treat the foot. I don't know how we got to this point. Why do we treat the foot so differently? So, and again, I did try other routes, but I get to the point where I'd say, okay, you need an orthotic. And I always made rigid orthotics. I wanted them to last. You need to wear them in all your shoes. You need 3 pair of them in all the different shoes, right? Permanent treatment of foot pain, but do we do that? We don't. Do we ever take someone who's got whiplash and put them in a neck brace forever? I don't, as a treating therapist. I might put them in that neck brace temporarily and try to calm down the symptoms, and I'm going to try to get them strong, try to increase their range of motion, increase their function as soon as possible. Because if I keep them in that, just like that foot orthotic, it may keep them relieved of pain, but they're never going to hold their head up. And I could use the same example for shoulder injuries, for back injuries, right? I don't know why we got to this point of thinking in this way, but we have. And then came the book, okay? And this was also transformational for me. And the reason is that, remember, I haven't been running. I've been inline skating and doing other things, but I haven't been running. The part of this book, and it's an amazing book. If you haven't read it, read it. It's a fun Indiana Jones adventure story. It is not about running so much. It's not about barefoot running, I can tell you that. It's about the joy of running, and it's about this really cool story, and it's all true, and the characters are unbelievably colorful, and it's a great story. And then he weaves in, very artistically, a little bit of science and a little bit of evolution. It was the evolution that spoke to me, because he basically brought up the article that was called Born to Run, that this book was actually named after, by one of a local scientist here, Dan Lieberman, and his colleague, Bramble.